Well, for me, cultural institutions are extremely essential for the cohesion of society and for providing people knowledge that they might not get anywhere else. And for that exact reason, I think that it's important that as cultural institutions, we always take very good care of trying to include everyone. We're basically here to provide a service for the need of the people. That's something we should always remember. We're not an island in ourselves. We're not here for our own purpose. We're actually here for the people. So when we look at who uses the cultural institutions, it's important to go into the diversity discussion. So is it only one specific part of the population that uses the cultural institutions, or are we actually broadening out? And I think that it's our obligation to have a broad audience. If we don't have that, it's our obligation to figure out why is that? What is it that makes these people not want to come? Or doesn't it seem relevant to them to actually experience the art or literature, whatever we have in our cultural institutions that we believe is actually important for everyone? That's why we're here. I think for many years, in the old days, a lot of the cultural institutions, also the learning institutions, have been sort of these cathedrals of knowledge or cathedrals of culture, where you had to behave in a certain way to gain access, and where the people, the professionals working there, were the gatekeepers. And that has luckily changed very much over time, both in learning institutions and in cultural institutions. But I think we still see remnants of it some places, not everywhere. It differs from museum to museum, or library to library, or school to school. But we need to struggle with that feeling of exclusiveness, because that's not who we are. For instance, museums or libraries are not archives. We're not here to preserve and guard what we have towards someone who comes in. On the contrary, we're here to open it up. So for me, I think the first and foremost obligation for us as workers in cultural institutions is to figure out how can we open up the best way possible. How can we include people in the best way as possible, and how can we make it accessible? It's really very much about permission. How do we give permission? How do people feel they have permission to be themselves, to actually take ownership of the space that they come into, and that they feel comfortable in that space? One of the things that we work quite heavily with is how to eliminate rules. And of course, in a museum, you will have the rule that you can't touch stuff. Everybody knows this, it's not a secret, and nobody discusses why this is. But that doesn't mean that you have to set up tons of rules and regulations, because if people want to destroy stuff, they will, no matter how many rules you write down. So instead, you actually target the people who know how to behave, and with your rules, you tell them, I own this space, I tell you what you can do, I tell you how you can do it, and as a visitor, you begin to feel anxious and not very comfortable, and not knowing if you're overstepping some boundaries. So really, we need to ask ourselves, how can we create spaces with no rules, where the rules are really the basic rules of being together in the same space. Same rules that applies in the squares in the city, in the roads. Don't hit each other. Don't annoy each other. Don't be violent. Don't, all these kind of things. Don't destroy stuff. Common rules that we all know. So, because that will make it more accessible, and people will feel that they can be themselves in those spaces. I think one of the things when we're dealing with architecture for cultural institutions, of course there are some specific things we need to address if we have stuff that can't have enough light and stuff like that. But in terms of looking at architecture, we need to look again at the people. So how do we create architecture that meets the human needs? And as human beings, we all need light. We need spaces where we can be together. We need spaces where we can be alone, where we can dive into something and be intellectually stimulated, or where we can share what we know. So I think every cultural institution should have this diversity of spaces, and that's something that we need to incorporate into the architecture. We also know that we behave differently in terms of if we have high ceiling, low ceiling. If you seek silence and more contemplation, you will instantly go towards low ceilinged area, because that's where you expect to find it. Where if you want to sort of spread your arms and share what you know, you want to go to high ceilinged areas. So you can use architecture in trying to promote the way people act, and also to make people understand what's going on, instantly understand what's going on here. How am I supposed to feel, act, behave here, just through architecture? So I think it's extremely linked how people perceive the culture that they came to experience. It's linked very closely to the architecture of the room, because spaces give permission. Spaces tell you how to behave, tell you how to feel. And if you're in a constrained space, you don't feel comfortable, you don't learn anything, you don't listen to anything. If you're in an uncomfortable chair at a conference, you can't hear anything. You get bored and you get tired and you sort of sit shifting around. It's like that with architecture as well. So we need to take better care of how we shape the spaces that we do, and also create spaces that are not programmed already. The flexibility of spaces will make people know that they're allowed to actually influence this. So it's not enough to have wheels on chairs or whatever. You actually have to have spaces where people feel they can influence what goes on there. And in order to do that, you need to show very clearly, this is a flexible space, it's a temporary space. You're allowed to do more crazy stuff in a temporary space than in spaces where it has to be here for 100 years. So through creating these unprogrammed and flexible spaces, you will also address people more directly and involve them into creating what could happen in these flexible and temporary spaces.